Hello and welcome to Unwind Sessions, where right after my shift I give the highlights of my workday. My name is Juan. I am an English, Spanish medical video remote interpreter with over 4 years of experience. Today is Wednesday, um, April 14, 2021. Today I took a total of 33 calls. It was mostly video sessions, which was a little tough, but the sessions they were pretty easy. There was no new vocabulary today, and it was just pretty straightforward. There were not any difficult situations as well either, so everything was just a pretty easy day today as far as sessions go. There were some sessions where the providers asked me if I could just stand by that um, the patient actually spoke good English or understood good English, or well, actually spoke good English. And they told me if I could just stand by for the session, and if they ever needed me, that they could just ask, and that way I can go ahead and interpret wherever they needed to not affect the flow of the call. And yeah, I agreed to that. And they only on one session they only used me. I don't remember what they needed me for, but it was just like a sentence for a pap smear or some uterus or something. Yeah, I remember now. It was uterus. The lady didn't know what uterus meant, and she didn't know what a pap smear was, and that was the only two words that I had to interpret for that session. And there were a couple of other sessions where I had to do the same thing, but I didn't have to interpret anything in any of those sessions. So it was a pretty easy day today. I did make one mistake. There was a session where they were giving a lady oxygen to take home, and they were showing her how it worked. And well, um, well, yeah, the man, the provider from the company that provides oxygen, let the lady know that um, she needed to place an oxygen gauge on the oxygen tank. And what I actually interpreted gauge as was in Spanish medidor, which medidor is actually a meter. But honestly, I couldn't think of a word to actually uh, uh, like like the equivalent to gauge, and I don't know how come I didn't look it up this time, but for some reason I didn't look it up, and I was just breaking my head, and Medidor was the closest thing, and it worked. So I went with Medidor, and it's not such precise. I didn't like it because a medidor would be a meter, and a meter actually just measures, but it doesn't allow you to input information or to check information like a gauge. Uh, uh, a good equivalent for gauge would have actually, in this case, would have actually been calibrador, which is a calibrator. Because if you think an oxygen gauge, it actually allows you to twist the dial to the oxygen setting that you need. But if it was an oxygen meter, like pulse ox, it doesn't allow you to, or actually in this case, to keep it in context, it would be like a flow meter that it allows you to see the flow of oxygen, but it doesn't allow you to regulate it. It doesn't allow you to calibrate it. So that was one mistake that I made. Not a big one, but a mistake. Another thing, today, a lady asked a gentleman if she could curl the toes. Now, curl for some reason is a word that always gets me. I don't know why. I should have had it down already. But the lady said if you could curl your toes, and for the life of me, I couldn't think of what to say. So what I actually ended up saying was contraiga los dedos de los pies, which means contract your toes. But in hindsight, that expression curl your toes is not really used. So if you actually translate it and you actually say someone, like, they will understand you, I hope. But it's not ideal because that is not so like an expression that you actually use. So if you translate it, it'll sound funky. So in this case, you actually have to interpret it, which instead of curl your toes, you would say doble los dedos de los pies, which is bend your toes. And that was it. But I didn't think about it after the session was gone. I don't know why. Like, I just had a big old brain fart and I just couldn't do it. Like, curl, the word curl just blindsided me and I just couldn't get over that. I mean, the gentleman understood and it was the same meaning, but it was not precise again. And I actually went ahead and put curl your toes in Google Translate, and it says curvar los dedos de los pies, which I don't know. It sounds weird because it's not like an expression that is usually used, like to curve your toes. Not in English either. And I went and I put it in deep L, and it said enroscar los dedos de los pies. Now this is more of a description because enroscar is a translation for curl, and it works, but I don't think I've ever used that, or I don't think that's ever used. I think for curl your toes would be doblar los dedos de los pies, or curl your fingers, or doblar. I think it's a better expression for it. And one last thing that happened today was that as soon as I got on the video session, I was going to give my whole spiel, and the lady said, "You know what? We don't have time for that right now. The lady is having chest pain, and I just need information." And whenever they tell you that, well, it's an emergency, and you just go straight into interpreting. That's not a problem. It turns out that the lady was also hard of hearing, so what I do when they're hard of hearing, I try actually yelling to see if they can hear me. And this time the lady could hear me. Sometimes they're not going to be able to hear you, but this time the lady could hear me. And one thing that happens whenever you have a hard of hearing patient, or one thing that happens to me, um, is that it's just so many things that are going on when you're interpreting. You're listening to the speaker, you're analyzing everything that is said, and you are writing your notes, you are thinking about what to write in your notes, and then you have to make sure that you can actually read your notes, and all of this that's going on. And it makes me forget that the patient is hard of hearing. So then all of a sudden, I might speak softly to the patient, and of course, the patient doesn't hear me. And then I remember that they're hard of hearing, so I have to say it again and I have to yell. And then sometimes I yell to the provider, and then I remember that the provider's not hard of hearing, so you're actually juggling this extra thing, the volume. You have to raise your voice for the patient, and you have to be a normal voice for the provider, and sometimes that gets me mixed up. I believe that this is probably a problem on over the phone or VRI, because I think if it's an in-person interpreter, I've never been an in-person interpreter, honestly, but I believe that in a setting, then since you're right next to the person, I think it's easier. I don't know if we have any viewers that are actually uh, in-person interpreters. Maybe you can help us with your knowledge and your experience. But yeah, that's something that always gets me mixed up. And I since today was such a chill day and there was not very many things, I am going to let you know about one of the hardest sessions that I ever thought I was going to have. I thought because I'm going to let you know why. So the session comes in, and it's a doctor that is wanting to call Colombia to speak to another doctor. And yeah, everything went well. The session connected and everything. And as soon as I introduced uh, both doctors to each other, The doctor said the hardest sentence that I've ever heard in my life. He just went straight on to let the doctor know something. I don't even remember what it was. It was just filled with so much technical wording that honestly I didn't even know a single word that the doctor said. And you should have seen my face. I couldn't see my face at that time because it was a phone session, but I could feel the cold sweat just dripping from my face. And probably if I would have seen myself, I would have, I bet you I turned pale and I didn't know what to do in that situation. And as I was about to ask the doctor for a repetition, the Colombian doctor actually answered. Like he understood everything the doctor said, all the technical language that I was not understanding. The doctor actually understood it and he answered it with his own technical language in Spanish. And I just stayed quiet, and the American doctor understood, and they just had this back and forth conversation. So they didn't even use me at all, but I was just there, and I was just listening to their conversation, not understanding what they were saying. It was just so technical, and it made me feel awful. It made me feel like the worst interpreter in the world. Uh, but in hindsight, if I was ever faced with that situation and the doctors were not able to understand each other, I think that the correct thing to do is to explain to the doctor that as a medical interpreter, we're trained to interpret for doctor to patient, you know? So, of course, we know technical language, but we don't know it like a doctor knows it. And of course, we're not going to be able to interpret a doctor to doctor conversation because we don't have that knowledge. That is beyond the scope. So what I would have actually said now that I have more experience, I would have actually let the doctor know this. I would have told the doctor, doctor, I'm sorry, but I am only trained in patient doctor to patient interpretation, not really doctor to doctor. So I'm not trained in the technical language that you are using, but I will do my best, and I am probably going to ask you a lot of repetitions, and sometimes I'm gonna have to ask you to use simpler words. And that's good. That's good because then the doctor will actually know that he has to use words that you actually know for you to interpret. And it's up to the doctor to decide if he will use you as an interpreter or if she actually wants to get a more specialized interpreter that can actually interpret a doctor to doctor interpretation conversation. I'm sorry. And so yeah, that was like the hardest session that I never actually contributed to. But I honestly I don't know if the dark right now I have a hindsight bias, you know, because I actually went through it. But I honestly don't know what I would have done at that time. I mean, of course, I would have excused myself to the doctor, and I would have felt like the worst interpreter in the world. But um, when that situation happens, when something is beyond your scope, beyond your limited knowledge, it is best to acknowledge that and to let the person know what's going on. That way, they can use simpler vocabulary, simpler language, or just request for a more qualified interpreter if there is one available, or if that is the case. And don't ever feel bad because you feel like you're not a good interpreter or you don't have enough knowledge at the beginning, because I mean only through experience will you actually be able to know what to do when you experience these situations, and these type of situations are not explained in training. So each of you is going to have to um, be required to actually handle that situation in a manner that is best for you according to your experience level. So that will be pretty much it for me today. There were no questions today. I hope to be answering some questions in the future. So if you have any questions about anything, about me, about our channel, about Interpret Your World, about work, about anything, please go ahead and leave your questions in the comments, and I will try to answer a couple of them on the next session. And also, um, I forgot what I was going to say. Uh, but no, anyways, moving on. I will be here every Monday through Friday right after work. In case I don't work, I will let you know so you don't expect a session. And that will be pretty much it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video and have not done so for more content. And don't forget to share. Happy interpreting. Goodbye.